Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. Today I'm working on my Burst into Bloom scarf, and since it's a double knitting project, it's the perfect time to teach you how to read a double knitting chart. At first glance, this chart looks just like a stitch chart that could be used for two-color stranded knitting. In fact, most two-color knitting motifs can easily be adapted to double knitting. However, double knitting charts are interpreted differently in three ways. First, the chart doesn't just illustrate how the right side of your project will appear. It shows what both sides of the design will look like, because we're basically knitting two fabrics at the same time, one on the front and one on the back. And they have the same overall motif, but are worked in opposite colors. Which brings us to the second difference. Normally, color charts would assign a single yarn color to a particular square on the chart. So, for example, if my chart were read like a standard color chart, maybe the blank squares would always be blue, and the filled squares would always represent purple. But for a double knitting chart, my blank squares are going to represent the background color of the pattern. So the background is going to be blue on one side and purple on the other side. The filled squares on the chart represent the motif color, purple on one side and blue on the other side. The final difference between a double knit chart and a regular color chart is that each square on the chart represents two stitches instead of one. The first stitch is the one that you'll see on the front of the fabric. The second stitch is the one that belongs to the back of the fabric. For every square on the chart, I'll knit a stitch on in one color, that will be seen on the front. I'll bring both yarns forward, purl a stitch in the opposite color that will be seen on the back, and then bring both yarns to the back. Let's work across one row of the chart so you can see it in action. I've blocked off the top part of my chart, and I'm going to work across that top row of the pattern. My first 4 squares indicate 4 pairs of stitches worked in the background color, starting with whatever the background color is on the front that I'm looking at, and in this case each pair will start with the blue. So I'll knit a stitch in blue, bring both of my yarns forward, and then purl the next stitch in purple and bring both yarns back. Those first 2 stitches on my needle represent the first square on the chart. And you may notice that when I was working those first 2 stitches, that in between them I crossed my yarns and linked the stitches together. That's just because that's how I chose to work the salvages of my project for the entire piece. There are different ways to work your salvage stitches, but I'm not going to go into that in detail in this video. So the second pair, again, I'm going to knit the first stitch in blue, bring both yarns forward and purl the next stitch in purple and bring both yarns back. Pair number 3. And pair number 4. Now I need to work 4 pairs of stitches in the motif color. I'm going to reposition my yarns so that it's easier to knit. So I'll just cross one over the other. And each pair of stitches is going to start in whatever the motif color is on the front of my work. So in this case, it's the purple. So I'll knit a stitch in purple, bring both yarns forward, and then purl a stitch in blue and bring both yarns back. Pair 2, pair 3, and pair 4. Now I need to work 5 pairs of stitches in the background color, starting with whatever the background color is on the front, and that's the blue. I'll cross my yarns again to make it easier to manage the stitches. And my first stitch, or my first pair, will start with a blue knit, both yarns forward, a purple purl, and bring both yarns back. And one thing you should notice here, when you're switching in between working the background and the motif pairs, or the motif and the background pairs, you'll get 2 stitches next to each other that are the same color. That only happens when you are switching between the motif squares and the background squares, or vice versa. Otherwise, each pair of stitches is going to alternate in colors. And you can see it happened again right here. I have 2 purples together. That's where I switched, and I had been working the background, and then I began working the motif stitches. So now let's continue with those 5 pairs of stitches in the background color. This is pair number 2. Three, 4, and 5. Now I need to work 3 pairs of stitches in the motif color. So again, I'm going to cross my yarns so that they're easier to manage. Five pairs of stitches in the background color, starting with whatever the background color is on the front, and that's the blue. Four pairs of stitches in the motif color. And finally, 4 pairs of stitches in the background color. And I finished 1 row of my double knitting, and I could turn things over and start working across my next row. I I hope you enjoyed learning how to interpret a double knitting chart. If you're ready to tackle a double knitting project, head over to the shop section of thechillydog.com and look for my Burst into Bloom scarf. Also, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!